So my biggest problem with yesterday's card, aside of course from my Gemini Junior breaking halfway through, is the lining up a coordinating die when my paper has warped. Actually, this problem isn't just when paper is warped. I have a general issue of lining up coordinating dies whether the paper is warped or not. Whether they're a singular die or one of these group dies that cuts out 10 die cuts at once, it's super frustrating when you've put all that work into embossing or stenciling something or coloring something and then it doesn't line up and you have to start all over again. Now, avoiding these dies is not really something that I want to do because I've already purchased so many of them, and not only that, they're a genius time-saving hack. And because I swore I'm going to use this bundle throughout all 12 days of the 12 days of Christmas, I need to get this figured out fast. So I'm going to get started by creating a background with either my hot foil plate or my coordinating die. I'm going to show you two ways to do this, one if you're using the coordinating die and the other if you're using the hot foil plate. The hot foil plate does have the advantage that you get all the details from within the ornaments, whereas the coordinating die is just the outside of it. Now all you need to do is run these through your die cutting machine. So with the hot foil plate, I'm going to run it normally through the die cutting machine. These hot foiled raised areas are not thick enough to cut my cardstock, so I can run it through normally. With the coordinating die, you do need a rubber mat to be able to do this because the die will of course cut your cardstock. But when it sinks into the rubber mat, it just impresses into the cardstock and then it's really easy to get done. So now we've used these in two different ways that aren't the standings for cutting or foiling, getting more use out of our products. And we got this gorgeous background, which I suggest doing on some sort of light cardstock if you're going to be following along with the tutorial today. All right, so my first thought with coordinating dies and warped cardstock is I'm going to do all the steps it takes before my cardstock would warp, then I'll cut, and then I'll do those steps that actually might warp my paper. I thought this might work. So I decided to try out the stenciling to get a no-line look to see how that would look. So just using the stencils without stamping over top or stamping the outline. And a lot of your layering stencils will actually work on their own without needing to stamp over top or die cut over top. They'll work as is, which is so fun. Because again, you're getting more use out of the supplies, making the money spent definitely more worth it. So I decided to do all of the layering stenciling here, and I got all my layers built up, and then I decided to run it through my die cutting machine. Now at this point though, I've already put in quite a bit of work, and if I die cut and it doesn't line up properly, well, I just did that work for nothing, didn't I? But I do have to say the results were so much better than yesterday with the warped cardstock. I had about one die in this set that didn't line up quite properly. But why is that? Is the die not good? Is it my lining up skills? I'm not quite sure. And I definitely know that I don't want to put in all that work again, die cut, and it not turn out. So I had to rethink things. Okay, we're going to continue the card in just a second, but I need you to stop for just 1 minute. I need you to do something for me. Now, I was looking through some analytics the other day, and I did notice that there are a whole lot more of you that are watching but not subscribing. It is my goal for next year to hit the 100,000 mark, and I know you can help me do this. All right, let's get back to the card. I decided to try this again. This time I thought I'll die cut first and then stamp on top. With a Misti stamping tool or any sort of stamping tool, it should be easy to line the stamp up afterwards, right? So I grabbed my cardstock, I die cut it and ran it through my machine, and then I put tape over the back so that nothing would move, and I reinserted all of the die cuts. I lined up my stamp as carefully as I could, definitely making sure to get a bird's eye view. So I actually stood up and looked directly over top of my cardstock in order to line this up because I really need to see it from up top rather than off to the side. And it did a pretty good job, I have to say. It wasn't quite perfect, but I definitely know at this point, without doing a whole lot of work to begin with, whether or not it's worth continuing or not. I definitely think I'm onto something with the die cutting first and then stamping and doing everything later. At least this way, if the cardstock's going to warp, it'll warp my die cuts that are already made and I can straighten those out by putting them in a heavy book later. But I thought to myself, maybe there is one additional way of doing things. Maybe some way that's better. And this is what I came up with. So I started off in the same way. I ran the die cut through the machine, taped the back, and stuck it into my Misti stamping tool. This time I inserted a piece of packaging or a piece of acetate over top of my die cut and I lined up my stamp. This way I'm going to stamp onto the plastic. I can actually see is it off or not before actually stamping on my paper. And this way I can definitely know whether or not it's properly lined up in my Misti stamping tool or not. Now I think though, if I'm going to put in all this effort, I definitely want to stamp and die cut these multiple times so I have a whole bunch for the future. That way I put in all the effort once and I profit from it for cards to come. So you'll probably notice that when I did this, it still wasn't perfect with the coordinating die. And that's when I took my acetate and just tried playing over top of the cardstock to see if I can get this to line up. And that's when I realized that this isn't actually a user error. There is no way to line this up with the exact amount of white spacing around it. No matter how much I moved and shifted this, one or two of the die cuts always ended up a little off center. It's not the end of the world, but it is a little bit of a disappointment for sure. All right, we just need to assemble the card now and finish up the final touches. So I'm going to add the card panel onto my card base. I love the white frame around it. I think it really makes that light gray pop. But I definitely knew that I wanted to add my ornaments, but they were getting a little lost with the background. So I grabbed one of my absolute favorite things, and that is a circle die, square die, rectangle die. Those are my three go-tos when I need to just add something behind a die cut. In this case, a circle die. And of course, I decided to layer it because it'll just add some extra touches to the card. So I grabbed some vellum and I grabbed some white cardstock and die cut some circles. This way I was able to layer up all the ornaments and they were on their own little area. I attached the ornaments to give them a bit of dimension with a combination of foam tape and regular glue. So some are flat against the surface and one of them is popped up a little bit. It'll just give it a really nice shadow and a nice touch to the card. Lastly, I heat embossed a sentiment in white on black cardstock and attached it to the card. Now we can stop and take a look at the final card. I just wanted to point out how pretty that vellum looks in the circle. It is something that I go to every time so that it's not too much, but I can still add to my card. Vellum is really amazing. And if you'd like to see a bunch of ways of learning how to use vellum in your card making, let's meet over here in this video and I'll show you how to do that. All right, bye for now.